Hi there. Welcome to Plant-Based for Life. This is Ziebart. You are watching quick cooking classes. Tonight we are doing gravy, two kinds of gravy, a super quick one and one that takes a little bit longer, one that's a little richer and one that it's so light and healthy you could eat it every day. So please, won't you join me up in my kitchen? Welcome to Ziebart's Kitchen. This is Plant-Based for Life. You're watching quick cooking classes. Today we are going to be doing two kinds of gravy. One that has a few more ingredients, is just a little bit more elaborate, but this one is the very light version. This version, we're going to be doing one that's a little more rich, and this one that's a little bit lighter. This one you could eat every day. It is so healthy and so light. Have a look at these ingredients. Lots of veggies, mushrooms, which we want to get in on a daily basis. So this one is really, really fantastic. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm just going to scooch this out of the way so we can use the burner. I just wanted you to see all those beautiful ingredients. All right, so we need a saucepan and a whisk. Also a very good idea. We are using low sodium veggie stock. This one's my favorite. They don't pay me to show you this. This is just my favorite because it's the cleanest, the lowest sodium one I can find. The only thing that might be better is if you made it yourself. So I quite like this one. We're going to use this and I'm going to cook with it. I'm going to use it right away. Normally I allow veggies to cook a little bit on their own, but we want these veggies to really soften and kind of melt into our gravy. So I'm going to turn that down. We want that around medium, no hotter than that, because we don't really want caramelization. Now you can use caramelization. You can caramelize your onions, you can caramelize the mushrooms, and that will add more flavor. So that's entirely up to you. You could try that out and see how that works for you. For today, we're just going to soften our veggies. That's our goal. For that little bit of sizzle, that means we are in good shape to get started. So we have veggie stock that we are keeping on hand to cook with. So you'll need, a few tablespoons of that. Plus we have a half a cup that we're going to add later. So make sure you have plenty of veggie stock. This is a half a cup of small diced onion. And we're going to add that. You can see this is nice and warm already. So we're going to add that to our pan. Got a little sizzle going there. Awesome. Absolutely perfect. Now, the smaller you dice this, the more that more surface area it has, the more it's going to release its flavor into the rest of your dish. And the smaller the chunks in your gravy. Now, this gravy is a little bit chunky, but you can always blend it as well. Or use your hand blender, your immersion blender. I'm just going to add a little bit more veggie stock. We don't want this to caramelize, and I'm going to turn it down just a smidge because it's a little bit warm here. Okay, so we're just going to let that cook for a few minutes until these onions start to get translucent. I'm going to add some garlic. Now, if I was dry sauteing, I would not add garlic now. I would add garlic at the end, because what happens when you burn garlic or you caramelize it, it gets very, very bitter. And so, but because we're using a lot of liquid, we should not have an issue with burning our garlic if we're paying attention to our pan. So we have 2 cloves of fresh garlic, finely minced. We'll get all that delicious garlic in there. Yum, 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 yum. Okay, so again, just keeping that nice and wet in there so that we don't get any burning. When things brown, that's the same thing as caramelization, right? So there's a fine line between caramelization and burnt. So that's why we don't walk away from our pan. Now, in the recipe, this calls for you to leave this to cook for a couple of minutes, but to save time, we're going to go ahead and add our carrots now. Why am I adding carrots to gravy? So, very, very common base of ingredients, depending on which culture you're working in, which culture you're cooking with, is onions, garlic, carrots, and celery. Those 4 ingredients are very common for bases for sauces, soups, chilies, stews, you know, all that sort of thing, because they add amazing flavor. This little bit of carrot in here is going to add a little bit of sweetness as well as added flavor. So we have onion, garlic, and carrot. Make sure to dice that carrot super fine because it is very hard. It's a hard veggie, and we want that to soften as much as possible. Turn that up just a little. You can see the onions are starting to get a little bit soft, a little bit translucent. That's perfect. Absolutely perfect. I'm not really stirring here. What I'm doing is just making sure that the veggies are in contact with the bottom of the pan as much as possible, because that speeds up the cooking. All right, so we're going to let that cook for just a couple of minutes. We want the onions to be translucent, and we want the garlic to be nice and fragrant. We want it to start cooking, not burning, cooking. And then what we're going to do is we are going to add our mushrooms. Now, in this recipe, it calls for you to just soften these mushrooms, but it would be really cool to try to caramelize them a little bit. So today we're just going to cook them. We're just going to cook them until they're soft. But if you wanted to try caramelizing these a little bit, when you caramelize mushrooms, they have an incredible flavor without adding anything else to them. They are such, they have that umami flavor, right? Just really, really fantastic. And so today we're going to soften, but you might want to try caramelizing. It'll give you a slightly darker gravy, but you know, it just depends on the person. One of our gravies is very, very light today, very, very light in color. Just a matter of, you know, what gravy is to you. Gravy was a big part of my life, big part of my childhood. Whenever we had a fancy meal, anytime there was any sort of celebration, or we went over to grandma's house or whatever, there was gravy. And their gravy was made basically with, you know, animal juices and flour and water. This is a much healthier, but still fantastically luscious and flavorful version. I'm going to turn this up just a smidge. So we're just going to keep paying attention to our mushrooms here. Now, these are baby bellas. You can use white button mushrooms. That's fine too. Remember, mushrooms have beautiful health properties, but they always, always, always must be cooked. So make sure you cook them. They have a mild toxin in them. They won't make you super sick, really, but that's just not really good for you. So make sure to cook those. Now, to save time, you can actually buy them already sliced. I bought the 2 packages of these. The recipe calls for 4 ounces. And so I just took half of this package, but I also sliced it up some more because these are kind of thick and you kind of want thin slices for your gravy. So either buy your mushrooms and slice them thinly, or buy them sliced up and just slice them up a little bit more. This just saved a little bit of time. So again, we have half a cup of white or yellow onion, finely diced, 2 cloves of garlic, a half of a carrot, or I used a small carrot here, 4 ounces of baby bella mushrooms. You can use white button mushrooms too. And then we want to just cook all of these veggies and mushrooms until they're nice and soft. It's really getting there. Those onions are getting nice and translucent. You can see the carrots starting to change color a little bit, starting to soften. Make sure those mushrooms are thoroughly cooked, but not starting to brown. We just want them nice and soft. I'm going to leave that just for a minute. Now, as I said, this recipe is a little bit more involved, but ridiculously healthy and very, very light. If you wanted, it would be really easy to double this and throw a bunch of it in the freezer so you didn't have to go through this process every time if you wanted this healthier version. I'm also going to show you a super fast, super quick, and slightly more decadent version in a moment. Okay, so what the recipe is calling for is basically poultry seasoning. Now you can either, just grab yourself a bottle of poultry seasoning that has all of these seasonings in it already, or you can do individual, either fresh or dried versions of poultry seasoning. These are the main ingredients in poultry seasoning: sage, thyme, and rosemary. Now, when you use fresh, you want to double it. So whenever they ask for, let's say that they've asked for thyme, but you have fresh thyme, you want to double how much you put in as opposed to the dry. The dry is more concentrated. So we're using dry today, and I've used these 3. Now the sage is nicely ground up. You see these are a little bit, they're kind of chunky, right? And so what you can do is you can either, what we want to try and do is release some of the fragrant oils that are in the herb, this spice. And so you can see there are little bits here. Now you can either just take them in your hand and rub them around to release some of their flavor. That will help activate some of those oils and get them, release some of that flavor. Or what I have done here, I have a mortar and pestle. You don't need this, but you can use it if you want to. So I put my measurements of all the spices in it, which is half a teaspoon of half a teaspoon of dry thyme, 1/4 teaspoon of sage, 1/4 teaspoon of rosemary. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to work them around a little bit. They don't have to be perfectly smooth, but just break them up a little bit so you get, again, it's about that surface area. It's about releasing some of the inside of those spices. And you get a lovely binging bonging sound as well. All right, so that's good. Now, see, it's not perfectly fine, but it's just broken up a little bit more, and I'm gonna add that to my veggies. These are getting nice and soft and fragrant. You love it when I sing to you, don't you? Okay. So it's starting to get a little bit dry in the pan, but I'm not going to add any more liquid yet because we are pretty much almost there. So just keep a close eye on it. So what we have in here so far: onion, garlic, carrot, mushrooms, thyme, sage, rosemary. Now I'm going to add some cornstarch. You can use flour, white flour, or any other kind of flour you like. Now, this recipe calls for cornstarch, so that's what I'm going to put in. But I recommend trying different kinds of flour. Remember, cornstarch is a very fine starch. It's ground up very, very, very fine. And so that's going to really go into our bloodstream really quickly. One thing one of the flours I really like to thicken things up quickly is actually chickpea flour. That one is fantastic. So today I'm going to use cornstarch, but I highly recommend you try out some different kinds of flours that are made with whole ingredients. So we've got 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. The key with cornstarch is to have a whisk handy. So we've got our 1/2 cup of veggie stock, and whisk that right away so that it doesn't get lumpy on you. All right, whisk, whisk, whisk. Okay, so we want to cook that a little bit, whether it's cornstarch or whether it's flour. What you don't want is that raw flour taste. And so you want to cook it, just basically for about a minute so you don't have that raw flour taste. When it's chunky like that, it gets into whisk. But I've gotten the cornstarch mixed in, so I'm going to switch back to my wooden spoon here. See how thick that is already? We're going to be adding more liquids, don't worry. It's going to be okay. So that's pretty good, just about a minute. So we're adding 2 teaspoons of soy sauce or tamari. Soy sauce or tamari, that goes in. And 1 cup of unsweetened plant milk. Now, if you want to keep this nice and light, use an unsweetened almond milk with nice clean ingredients, nothing else in it. If you can find nothing else but almonds, that's perfect. Almonds and water. Today I'm using soy milk because that's what I have on hand. Remember, soy milk, just soybeans and water. That's all we want in it. And what we're doing is we are stirring this until it is the consistency that we're looking for. Also, we want it to be the right color. So the longer that you cook it, the darker the color should get. but it won't change dramatically. So again, if you wanted a darker gravy, you could try caramelizing your onions and caramelizing your mushrooms first. You see, this is starting to thicken up already. So the last flavor ingredient we want to add is a little bit of pepper. You can add more things. If you're adventurous in the kitchen, then add more things. But today we're just going to add a little bit of pepper. I'm not a huge pepper fan myself, but it would not be gravy to me without some pepper in it. Okay, you see it's bubbling quite vigorously. That's good, but we want to make sure that we continuously stir. So we don't want that to burn. Stir enough pepper. Okay, now you see how chunky that is? Look at that. Look at how chunky that is. That is glorious. It's delicious. It's going to be really, really good on whatever you put it on, mashed potatoes or, you know, your lentil loaf or whatever it is that you use it for. But if you're not a fan of chunky mushroom gravy or any kind of chunky gravy, you would rather have it nice and smooth, you can use your hand mixer. So any kind of immersion blender and just stir it up in there. Be really, really careful though. Oh my gosh, that smells so good. Be really careful when you're using your immersion blender on things that are this hot because you don't want them to splash up at you. So be very, very careful, but that is something you can definitely do. I'm going to leave this one chunky just because for funsies. I would normally probably blend this up because I like my sauces to be smooth. But so for me, that right there is a perfect gravy. Nice and thick, perfect golden brown color. That is exactly what I consider to be a beautiful gravy. I'm gonna go ahead and turn that off. So yes, that recipe was a little bit more involved, but not too terribly difficult. Some chopping, a little bit of patience as you're cooking the vegetables. That's pretty much it. Don't forget, that smell. Don't forget to experiment. If you don't like one of the spices, or if you don't like one of the ingredients, if you're, you know, not a fan of this and not a fan of that, swap it out with other things. If you have any questions specifically about what can I swap for what, let me know and I'd be happy to answer that for you. Let me know, let me know, let me know. And I get to enjoy this. I can't wait till the day where I can share this with you. To put my lid on that, keep that nice and warm for later. I have my mashed potatoes all ready to go. Okay, so that was easy mushroom gravy. And there are even simpler versions out there. That one just has a lot of vegetables and a lot of flavor, and that's why I wanted to show you that one. But keep your, you know, your creative mind open and try some different ones. There's lots of different recipes out there. Now I'm going to make the easy cashew gravy. So in this one, much smaller set of ingredients, you know, really easy to put together, nothing to chop. The only thing I had to do was soak my cashews. So that's a half a cup of cashews. I soaked them in hot water because I really want them creamy and smooth. You need to drain off that water, and then we'll be just throwing everything in the blender. The other thing about this recipe is it's really easy, but the water must be warm, hot, not boiling, but hot. I highly recommend that you do not use hot water out of your tap. What happens is if you have, you know, older pipes, they'll actually leach into the water that's coming through, and that hot water, you know, encourages that process. So try not to use water out of the tap that's hot, even if you do drink your tap water. So I have a warm kettle waiting for me right here. So I'm going to go ahead and measure out 2 cups of my hot water. Bong. Okay. See, it's nice and steamy, good and hot. I have my blender right here. And so I am going to strain my cashews because we don't want that water. Just pop that whole thing in there, minus the water. And then we have So this is a half a cup of raw cashews soaked. It's half a cup before you soak them. They will swell as they've soaked. 2 tablespoons of Bragg's liquid aminos. You can do a little bit less if you're watching your sodium. A tablespoon of cornstarch. Again, this is an opportunity to try some different kinds of flours to see what can thicken this up for you. But this is the recipe, so this is how I'm making it. Tablespoon of cornstarch. 2 teaspoons of onion powder. Oh, no. We got to get all that flavor out of there. And 2 teaspoons of nutritional yeast. Yum. And then add your 2 cups of water. And what we do now, which I'm not going to make you wait for, is you blend it for 5 whole minutes. 5 minutes. 5 whole minutes. And then put it in your saucepan. Now, because I love you all, I have already prepared some, so you don't have to wait the 5 minutes. Let me give it just one last zhuzh in the blender. Lovely. And this is what we've got so far. This smells actually really good, but you see it's a little bit runny, but it looks pretty darn good so far already. Pour that into the pan. Look at that silky, luxurious goodness. Now, as I said, this recipe is a little bit lighter in color. And so that might throw some people off, but I have to tell you, it is absolutely delicious. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah, like chicken gravy. Yeah, exactly. So all we're doing here is thickening it to whatever thickness that you want. So put it on high for a moment, keep an eye on it, have your whisk handy. See, it's already thick enough for some people. At this point, it's already thick enough. I like it a little bit thicker. Trent, my husband, likes it so that you can stand a spoon up in it. It's entirely up to you. Now, I'm just going to sit here and stir this. We want to, continually whisk this so it doesn't burn or stick to the bottom. And when you put this in the fridge, it will continue to thicken. So all I do is add more water or veggie stock. Oh, that's one thing you can do. So this recipe calls for water, but you can use any kind of vegetable stock to add more flavor. You can add some spices if you want. This is a very, very simple, basic recipe. You can definitely, add some oomph to this if you wanted to. So when it's in the fridge, it's going to thicken. And if you want it a little bit thinner, just add a little bit more water or veggie stock, stir it up, heat it in a saucepan or in the microwave, whatever you like, and you're good to go. Basically, it just simmers here until it's as thick as you want. If it starts to bubble madly, then we might turn it down a smidge, but what we're doing is we're reducing it. So we want to cook out some of the liquid and activate a little bit of that cornstarch so that it thickens everything up. But this gravy is extremely silky. It's because of the cornstarch and because of the cashews and because of the super simple basic ingredients. It is an incredibly silky smooth, very rich, very, very, very thick and luscious kind of gravy. You can see it's starting to bubble around the edges. That's perfect. That's exactly what we want. It's going to continually whisk until we get what we're looking for. Nice bubbles. Starting to get hot on my hand. Careful not to burn yourself. Starting to bubble around the edges. Again, if it gets too bubbly, we'll turn it down just a little bit because we don't want it to burn. But this basically just takes a minute. It's a minute or two, depending on how thick you want it. Now, if you take this too far, right now, all you do is splash a little more water in, whisk it, it's good to go. And it tastes just as luscious. It is so flavorful that a little bit of extra water will not harm it at all. As a matter of fact, I've basically doubled this recipe the next day just by adding water. And it was as luxurious as it was when I initially made it. Now, this one is more calorie dense, right? Because it's got the cashews, it's got the cornstarch in it. So this one's a little bit more calorie dense. So if you are trying to release excess weight, then you might want to consider using this one a little more sparingly, or get creative and add some more veggies and other stuff to it. Okay, you see what we've got going here? Major, major bubbling. Let me turn that down just a smidge so we don't burn it. Lovely. So again, at any point since I put it on the stove, you could stop cooking. You don't have anything in here that requires cooking. And so it's all about the thickness that you want. And so right there, I'm calling it good. For me, there is a point when it just smells fantastic, and that's where I stop. Now look at that thick, luscious, gorgeous goodness. Let me just show you what it looks like. I'll plate it up. Yum, yum. You can put it all over. You can put it on your peas if you want. I love gravy and peas together. It is delightful. So we have two kinds of gravy. This one's a little bit richer, a little bit thicker, super, super fast. The other one's a little bit healthier, one that you can eat every single day if you wanted to. Don't forget to make those plates nice and balanced. We have our peas for our protein. We have our corn for our whole grain. We have potatoes for our starchy vegetables, and we have some green stuff, and we have different colors. Make sure that plate is beautiful. That is gravy.